The house was never quiet the way a peaceful house is quiet. It was quiet the way an abandoned building is quiet. Full of space where sound used to be. Full of rooms that had stopped expecting anything from the people inside them. Mabel Williams learned the difference in the 3rd year of her marriage. She had not always lived this way. There was a before. She held on to the before carefully because it was the only evidence she had that she had not imagined the version of her marriage that felt real. The before was a small apartment with thin walls and a kitchen where the tap dripped, and Michael would sit at the second-hand table until 2 in the morning building spreadsheets for a company that existed only in his vision and her belief in that vision. She had worked 2 jobs in those years. A daytime position at an accounting firm and evening shifts at a restaurant downtown where she wore a dark uniform and smiled at strangers and brought home tips she counted on the kitchen table before transferring them to the account she kept specifically for his business costs. She had paid the rent alone for 14 months while he built. She had transferred her entire inheritance from her grandmother, $42,000, into the company account the month the business nearly collapsed from a cash flow problem. She had not told him where the money came from. She had said it was a loan from a friend because Michael had a specific relationship with pride that made receiving help from his wife feel different from receiving help from anyone else, and she had loved him enough then to protect his pride even at the cost of the credit. She had written the pitch document that secured his first major investor. He had presented it himself, and she had sat in the audience and watched him deliver her sentences with his confidence, and felt nothing except pride because at that point his success and her success were the same thing. That was the before. The after arrived slowly the way all permanent things arrive. Not dramatically. Not with a single identifiable moment she could point to. Just the accumulation of small daily evidence that the man who had sat at the second-hand table had been replaced by a man who considered the table beneath him and had forgotten who sat across it during the years when it was the only table they had. He started coming home late in the 4th year. Not occasionally. Consistently. 2 in the morning, 3. Sometimes not at all, with a text that said staying at the office sent at midnight when she was already awake staring at the ceiling of the bedroom that cost more than her first apartment and felt colder than anywhere she had ever slept. She asked once. Early on, before she understood the rules of this new version of her marriage. He did not look up from his phone. I pay for this life, Mabel. Don't ruin it with questions. She did not ask again. She found other ways to manage. She volunteered at the community health clinic 3 mornings a week. She had coffee with a neighbor named Sura who had warm eyes and asked real questions and never once told Mabel she should be more grateful. She tended the garden at the back of the estate with the focused attention of someone who needed to watch things grow because everything else in her daily life seemed to be quietly dying. She visited her in-laws on a Sunday in the 5th year and sat across from Constance Williams over good tea and fine china and said carefully and without drama that she was lonely. That Michael was absent. That she needed help understanding how to reach a husband who had stopped looking at her. Constance set down her cup with the deliberate precision of a woman composing her response. Michael is building a legacy, Constance said. A man under that kind of pressure needs outlets. That is simply the nature of ambitious men. Be a supportive wife, Mabel. Learn to ignore the noise. Mabel drove home from that Sunday visit and sat in the car in the driveway of the $40 million house for 20 minutes before she went inside. She understood then that she was in this alone. She went inside. She cooked dinner. She set the table for 2. Michael did not come home that evening. He ate alone. She washed both plates anyway. She had not planned to go to his office that Tuesday. She had planned to go to the clinic and then to the market and then home. An ordinary day constructed around the ordinary business of a life she maintained with careful effort regardless of whether anyone noticed the maintaining. But she passed the building on the way to the market and she thought about the early years when she used to bring him lunch sometimes and he would look up from the desk with that expression, the one that said her presence was the best interruption available, and she thought maybe that expression still existed somewhere under the distance. Maybe showing up unannounced would reach something that scheduling and patience had not. She went in. The receptionist knew her. Mile. Called upstairs. She rode the elevator to the 14th floor and walked toward Michael's corner office, and through the glass wall she saw his personal assistant Joan standing at his desk with a document he was reviewing. This was normal. Joan had been with the company for 2 years and was efficient and composed, and Michael spoke of her with a specific admiration he had stopped directing anywhere else. What was not normal was the necklace. Rose gold. A small crescent moon pendant on a delicate chain. Mabel had seen that necklace in a jewelry store display case 4 months ago and pointed it out to Michael, and he had looked at the price and said it was beautiful and that he would get it for her birthday, and then her birthday had come and he had sent his assistant to buy her a spa voucher, and the necklace had not been mentioned again. When she asked about it 3 weeks later, he said it had sold out before he could order it. The necklace was around Joan's neck. Mabel stood in the corridor outside the glass wall and looked at the crescent moon catching the office light, and she breathed. The breathing she used when a situation required everything she had, and falling apart was something she could not afford. She went home. She did not go in to say hello. She found the phone 2 weeks later. Not looking for it. Moving his gym bag from the chair where he left it to the hook where it belonged, a small daily act of maintenance in a marriage full of them, and the phone slid out from the side pocket and landed on the floor screen up. She should not have read it. She read it. The messages went back 11 months. Joan and Michael. Not just the content of the messages, though the content was specific and detailed and removed any possible alternative interpretation. Tone. The way he wrote to Joan, warm, present, paying attention, remembering small details she had mentioned, asking follow-up questions about things she had said previously. The way he used to write to Mabel. Before. There were messages about Mabel. Joan had called her clueless. Michael had not corrected this. He had added his own observations, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had stopped considering that the subject of their conversation was a person who had paid his rent for 14 months and transferred her grandmother's inheritance into his company account, and written the pitch that made all of this possible. She put the phone back. She went to the kitchen. She stood at the sink and looked out at the garden she had planted and tended for 3 years and breathed for a long time. Michael came home that evening to find her cooking dinner. She was calm. She served the food. She asked about his day with the composed interest of someone who had not that afternoon read 11 months of messages in which her husband and his assistant discussed her inadequacy. He told her about his day. She listened. She was already planning. She came home early from the charity gala because her head hurt and the room was loud and she was tired in the bone-deep way that had become her permanent condition, and she wanted her own bed and nothing else. She walked upstairs. She opened the bedroom door. She stood in the doorway. The room was not empty. She stood there for a long moment. Long enough to understand completely what she was seeing. Long enough for both people in the room to become aware of her presence and turn. Michael said nothing. His face did the complicated series of movements that faces do when they are trying to determine which response is most advantageous before settling on one. Sloane looked at her. Sloane. Her younger sister. The one she had driven to university on her first day because their parents could not afford the petrol, and Mabel had paid from her own salary without being asked. The one she had lent money to 4 times over 7 years and never once mentioned the lending afterward because Sloane was her sister, and you do not hold accounts over people you love. Sloane looked at her with an expression that contained something Mabel could not name for a full 3 seconds, and then named with complete accuracy. Pity. And beneath the pity, very faint but unmistakably present, something that looked like satisfaction. Just happened, Mabel, Sloane said. Her voice was soft, reasonable. The voice she used when she was explaining something that she considered self-evident. Don't make it weird. Mabel looked at her sister. She looked at the room. She stepped back. She pulled the door closed quietly. Not slamming. Quietly. With the careful sound of someone who has decided that this particular door does not deserve the energy of a slam. She walked downstairs. She put on her coat. She drove to a hotel and sat in the lobby for 2 hours before she could trust herself to go to a room without breaking something, and she did not want to break anything in a public space. She did not cry. She had passed the place where crying was available some time ago without knowing exactly when. She thought about 14 months of rent. About $42,000. About pitch documents and dinner tables and Sunday afternoons in a garden she had built with her own hands. About a sister she had driven to university on the first day. She thought about all the things she had given that were now irretrievable. Then she stopped thinking about them. She filed them in the specific drawer she had been building for months, the one she opened only when she needed to remember why what came next was necessary. She booked the hotel room for 3 nights. She began making calls. Her parents' house smelled of the specific combination it had always smelled of. Her mother's cooking and her father's newspapers, and the particular staleness of a house that had not had its windows opened regularly in several years. She sat in the front room. She told them, clearly and without excessive detail, what she had seen in the bedroom, what she had found on the phone, the necklace, the messages, the pattern of the last 2 years that she could now see in its complete shape now that she was standing outside it. Her mother pressed her lips together. Her father looked at the carpet. These things happen in long marriages, her mother said finally. The voice of a woman delivering a prepared statement. Men are complicated creatures. The important thing is the life you have built together. The house. The security. Think about your future, Mabel. Sloane is young, her father said. She makes mistakes. She's your sister. You cannot throw away a family over a mistake. Mabel looked at her father. Michael has offered to purchase the new dealership, her mother said. The words arranged carefully, casually, as if the sequence of the conversation had not been building toward this sentence. For your father. It would be a significant investment in the family's stability. He asks only that you handle this with discretion. Keep it private. Let things settle. The room was very quiet. Mabel looked at her parents. The 2 people who had been the original evidence that she was loved. The 2 people whose job it had been to teach her what love looked like and what it required from the people who claimed to offer it. She understood in that moment that she had never truly had a family. She had had a group of people connected to her by biology who had made their calculations and found that her comfort and her dignity were worth less than a car dealership. She stood up. See, she said. She picked up her bag. She walked out. She did not slam that door either. She went back. Not because she had nowhere to go. She had somewhere to go. She had been quietly ensuring she had somewhere to go for the previous 3 weeks. She went back because leaving loudly was not the ending she had decided on. She went back and she became, over the following months, exactly what they had all been asking her to be. Quiet. Compliant. Present at the dinners and the events and the functions where Michael needed a wife beside him, and Mabel was the wife whose name was on the documentation. She watched Sloane wear her jewelry at a family gathering in November and said nothing. She sat across from Michael at a restaurant table in December, and listened to him talk about the company's growth and asked intelligent questions and watched him relax into the conversation with the relief of a man who believes the difficult chapter has resolved itself in his favor. He started leaving documents on his desk without locking them. Started discussing account structures with her again the way he had in the early years when they were building something together and she was the person who understood the numbers. Started trusting her signatures on things because she had become, in his assessment, a woman who had finally understood her place. He was not entirely wrong about the place she had found. He was completely wrong about what she intended to do from it. She was not stealing. She was meticulous about this distinction. The assets Michael had legally placed in her name during the marriage, the investment account, the property holding, the trust vehicle his own lawyers had structured for tax purposes, she moved these with the surgical precision of a woman who had spent enough years reading financial documents to understand exactly what was hers and what the law would confirm as hers. She opened 3 separate accounts in her own name. She found a lawyer through a referral from Sura, the neighbor with the warm eyes, a woman named Petra Rawl who specialized in matrimonial financial law and who sat across from Mabel in a quiet office and listened to the complete account without interrupting, and then said simply that she had seen worse and that the documentation Mabel had assembled was thorough and that they should proceed. They proceeded. Quietly. Thoroughly. The way Mabel did everything. The call came on a Wednesday evening. City General Hospital. A woman's voice. Asking if she was Mrs. Michael Williams. Telling her that her husband had been brought in from the Meridian Hotel. Cardiac event. He was stable but critical. Could she come? Mabel sat with the phone in her hand for a moment after the call ended. She thought about the Meridian Hotel, which was 4 blocks from his office and which she had never been to with him. She thought about the woman the caller had delicately not mentioned. She thought about Wednesday evening and what she had been doing on this particular Wednesday evening, which was sitting in Petrarol's office finalizing the last of the transfer documentation. She put on her coat. She drove to the hospital. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and quiet panic. Mabel walked through it in a cream coat and low heels, her handbag on her arm. Her face arranged in the expression she had perfected over the past 8 months. Not cold exactly. Not warm. Simply present. The face of a woman who had decided that the people around her were no longer worth the energy of a reaction. The family was already there when she arrived. Michael's mother, Constance, was in the hallway outside the room with both hands pressed to her chest and the expression of a woman performing grief for an audience she had selected in advance. Michael's brother Reed was on his phone in the corner, already talking to someone about assets, about accounts, about what happens to the portfolio if the surgery doesn't work. Her own mother was sitting in a plastic chair with her hands folded in her lap, looking at Mabel with the specific expectation of a woman who believes that this crisis will restore the arrangement she benefits from. Sloane was not there. Mabel had noted that immediately. She noted everything. She had been noting everything for 8 months. The doctor came to her first. Oh man. Tired eyes. The eyes of someone who spent his days at the intersection of medicine and the worst moments of people's lives, and had learned to deliver information cleanly. Mrs. Williams. Your husband suffered a significant cardiac event. There was a period of oxygen deprivation to the brain. He is stable but non-responsive to verbal communication. There is an experimental procedure that could potentially improve his neurological outcome, but it carries substantial risk and requires next-of-kin authorization. He paused. We need your signature to proceed. He held out a clipboard. The corridor was very quiet. Constance looked at Mabel with the expectant eyes of a woman who believed that the natural order of things would now reassert itself. That the wife would do what wives do in these moments. That the crisis would remind Mabel of her place and her duty and the considerable financial comfort of remaining inside the arrangement. Mabel looked at the clipboard. She looked at the pen the doctor was holding. Then she looked at Constance. Call Joan, Mabel said. The corridor went completely silent. I beg your pardon, Constance said. Joan, Mabel said. Her voice was even and pleasant and carried the specific quality of someone who has rehearsed nothing because they have already moved past the point where rehearsal is necessary. His assistant. The one wearing the necklace he told me was out of stock. The one whose messages on his second phone discussed my quote-unquote cluelessness in considerable detail. She tilted her head slightly. She seems to know him considerably better than I was permitted to. Let her sign. Mabel. Her mother's voice from the plastic chair. A warning dressed as a name. Or call the woman he was with in that hotel room, Mabel continued, in exactly the same pleasant tone. The one who left him on the floor and called the front desk from the lobby because she did not want to be associated with the inconvenience of a man dying in her company. She clearly has strong feelings about his survival. Perhaps she would like to formalize that relationship with a signature. Reed had come off his phone. He was staring at her. You can't be serious, he said. Or, Mabel said, opening her handbag, you could give him this. She placed an envelope on the nurse's station counter beside the clipboard. Chris. Sealed. His name written on the front in her handwriting. The handwriting she had used for 8 years of birthday cards and anniversary notes and grocery lists and everything else that had been the daily language of a life she had maintained alone. It is a divorce petition. Fully prepared. Witnessed. Legally complete. She looked at the envelope for a moment. Tell him to sign it when he wakes up. If he wakes up. He paused. I have been told he is a man who honors his agreements when the cost of not doing so becomes clear to him. I imagine his current circumstances provide adequate clarity. He is lying in there fighting for his life, Constance said. Her voice had dropped to something that was trying to be devastating and landing somewhere closer to desperate. He is your husband. Whatever has happened between you. He is your husband and he needs you. Mabel looked at her mother-in-law. For a long moment she simply looked at her. At the woman who had sat across a tea table 8 months ago and told her that men with stress needed outlets, and that a supportive wife ignored the noise. Who had known? Who had known and had chosen the dealership, and the reputation, and the carefully maintained surface of a family that looked correct from the outside? He stopped being my husband, Mabel said quietly. The morning I stood in my own bedroom doorway and watched your son and my sister look back at me from my own bed. He stopped being my husband the afternoon my parents sat across from me and told me to let it go to protect a car dealership. She picked up her handbag. What he is now is a man I used to know who is having a medical emergency. I genuinely hope he receives excellent care. She looked at the doctor. I am not next of kin in any meaningful sense. Please contact whoever he has listed as his emergency preference on his personal documents. I imagine that information will be illuminating for everyone. He turned. Mabel. Her mother was on her feet. If you walk out of this hospital, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Mabel stopped. She turned back one final time. She looked at her mother with the eyes of a woman who had finished grieving something a long time ago, and was now simply moving through the last administrative steps of its conclusion. I have been sitting with regret for 8 months, she said. I know exactly what it feels like and exactly how much space it takes up. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. This is not regret. This feels considerably lighter. She walked down the corridor. Her heels made a quiet, even sound on the tile. She did not hurry. She did not look back. At the nurse's station she stopped for one moment. She thought about Michael's hand writing those 2 words on that scrap of paper. The shaking handwriting. Sorry. She had stood at his bedside and looked at those words for a long time before she spoke. She had looked at the man in the bed, and she had done the most honest accounting of her life in the 60 seconds before she answered. I know you are, she had said. Her voice was very quiet. Not cold. Not triumphant. Just honest in the way that only people who have finished hurting can be honest. I know you mean it right now in this bed with these machines and this ceiling and no one in this room who is here for you rather than for what happens to your money when you are gone. She had looked at him steadily. But I need you to understand something. My sorry arrived before yours. I said sorry to myself every morning for 3 years for staying. For believing that loving someone harder would eventually make them capable of loving you back the right way. For thinking that being enough was something I could achieve if I just adjusted myself correctly. He paused. I forgave you 8 months ago, Michael. Not for you. For me. Because carrying hatred for someone who is not worth the weight of it is not strength. It is just a different kind of prison. She folded the piece of paper with his words on it and placed it in her pocket. You are not a monster. You are simply a man who was never required by anyone in his life to be better than his worst impulses. And I am simply a woman who spent 8 years hoping that requirement would come from inside you. She straightened. It did not. And I am done waiting for it. She had walked to the door. The thing that breaks my heart, she said from the doorway, not turning around, is not what you did. It is that you had someone who would have stayed through anything real. Illness. Failure. Anything real. And you traded that for things that will not sit beside you in a room like this one. He paused. I hope the dealership was worth it to my father. I genuinely do. Then she had walked out. Now, at the nurse's station, she looked at the divorce envelope on the counter one final time. Then she walked out of the hospital into the evening air. Cool and still. The city going about its ordinary business around her with the indifference of a world that does not pause for private reckonings. She had parked her car 2 blocks away. She walked to it slowly. She sat inside for a moment with her hands on the wheel and breathed. Not crying. Not cold. Simply present inside the particular feeling of a woman who has just closed a door that she should have closed a long time ago, and is only now understanding how much lighter a room feels when the thing filling it with weight has been removed. She started the car. She drove home. Not to the mansion. To the apartment she had signed the lease on 6 weeks ago. 3rd floor. Windows that got the morning light. Her name only on the door. She had left the mansion's keys on the kitchen counter before she came to the hospital. She did not need them anymore. The funeral was on a Thursday. Mabel wore charcoal gray. She sat in the third row and she listened to the eulogies with the composed attention of a woman attending a professional event. She noted which people cried genuinely and which people cried correctly. It was an informative distinction. At the reception in the Williams family home afterward, a woman named Dorothea Vance, 60-something, silver-haired, a permanent fixture in the social world Michael had cultivated and Mabel had maintained for 8 years, approached her with the expression of a woman who considers frankness a virtue she is performing a service by offering. "I have to say it, Mabel," Dorothea said. Her voice was carrying slightly, enough to be heard by the people nearby who had gone quiet with the specific alertness of those who sense a confrontation arriving. "You have been ice in this room all afternoon. I knew you both. I saw the love between you. Whatever difficulties you faced, he was your husband for 8 years. The least you could give him is visible grief." Mabel looked at her. She looked at her for a long, unhurried moment. Then she said, quietly and clearly and without raising her voice because the most precise things land hardest at normal volume, "You saw us at galas, Dorothea. You saw us at Christmas parties and charity dinners where everything was arranged correctly and everyone said the right things and the photographs looked exactly as they were designed to look. Pause. You did not see me eating alone at a table built for 12 because he had not come home by the 3rd evening in a row. You did not see me standing in my own bedroom doorway looking at my husband and my sister and being told not to make it weird. You did not see me sitting across from my parents while they explained that my dignity was worth less than a car dealership." She let that land. "You did not see me driving myself to appointments alone for months, and cooking dinners that went uneaten, and tending a garden in a house that had not felt like a home in 3 years. The nearby conversations had stopped entirely. "My grief was spent," Mabel said. "I used all of it. I used it in that house across 8 years in every room and every evening where I was invisible in my own life. I arrived here today completely empty of grief because I finished grieving while he was still alive and still choosing every single day to be exactly who he was. What you are calling ice is what 8 years of being asked to be grateful for a life that was quietly diminishing you produces in a woman when she runs out of reasons to perform warmth she does not feel." Dorothea opened her mouth. "You said we loved each other," Mabel continued. "I want to be honest about that because dishonesty is the one thing I am finished with. I loved him. Fully. I worked 2 jobs so he could keep his dream alive. I paid 14 months of rent alone. I transferred my grandmother's entire inheritance into his company account the month it nearly collapsed, and I did not tell him where the money came from because I loved him enough to protect his pride." She looked at Dorothea steadily. "I wrote the document that secured his first investor. I sat in the audience and watched him present my work with his confidence, and I felt nothing except pride because at that point his success and mine were the same thing." The room was silent enough to hear the clock. "That is love," Mabel said. "What he gave me in return was a beautiful house and an empty seat and a sister in my bed and parents who told me to keep quiet about it." She tilted her head slightly. "That is not love. That is ownership with pleasant branding. And I will not stand in this room and grieve the loss of an arrangement that had been ending for years before his heart decided to agree." She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "I genuinely wish his family peace," she said. "Real grief is hard and I would not wish it on anyone." She turned to leave. Sloane appeared at the edge of the room. She moved toward Mabel with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation and is not entirely certain it will go the way she practiced. "Mabel," Sloane said softly, "please. We're still sisters. Whatever happened, we're still blood. Can we just—" Mabel walked past her. Not through her. Not around her with effort. Simply past. The continuous, uninterrupted movement of a woman walking toward a door she has already decided to go through. Sloane's hand reached out. Mabel was already outside. The train station was ordinary at that hour. People moving through it with the focused purpose of those who know where they are going. Rolling bags on tile. A child running ahead of a parent. The announcement board clicking through destinations in its mechanical patient way. Mabel stood at the platform with one suitcase. She had sold the mansion 3 weeks before the funeral through Petra Rawls' office. The Williams estate assets were held in trusts structured with the advice of lawyers whose job it was to understand these things precisely. The family would find lawyers of their own. There would be letters and calls and processes that would take time. She had been told to expect all of this and to let Petra handle it, and she intended to do exactly that. She was not thinking about any of that now. She was thinking about a kitchen table. Second-hand one. A dripping tap. A man who sat until 2 in the morning building a company that existed first in his head and then in her belief in him and then eventually in the world. She was thinking about 14 months of rent and $42,000 and a pitch document and a garden she had planted by hand. She was thinking about how completely she had loved him. How real it had been. How the realness of it did not disappear just because of what came after. How carrying the truth of both things at the same time was the most honest thing she could do with the experience. The announcement board clicked. Her train. She picked up the suitcase. She walked to the platform. She did not look back at the station behind her because there was nothing there that belonged to her anymore, and she had learned over the past year that looking back at things that no longer belong to you is simply a way of making yourself available to a past that has already finished with you. She boarded the train. She found her seat. She sat down. She looked out the window as the platform began to move past. The station growing smaller. The city growing smaller. The skyline she had lived inside for 8 years reducing itself to a shape against the morning sky, and then disappearing entirely behind the first curve of the track. She looked at her hands in her lap. The ring was not there. She had removed it the morning she signed the last of Petra's documents and placed it on the kitchen counter of the mansion next to the keys. Her hands looked like her own hands again. She looked out at the land opening up beyond the city. Fields, trees, the wide flat sky of somewhere else. She breathed. Not performing calm. Actually calm. The specific calm of a woman who has finished something enormous and is sitting quietly inside the first moments of what comes after. She had not known what came after would feel like this. She had been so occupied with the doing of it that she had not thought carefully about the morning when the doing was complete, and there was only the being left. Felt surprisingly like space. Like a room after the furniture has been removed and you can finally see how large it actually is. She would figure out what to put in it. She had time. She had herself. For the first time in 8 years that was enough to begin with. To every woman who has been told to keep quiet to protect someone else's comfort. To every person who funded another person's dream and was written out of the story when the dream succeeded. To everyone sitting at a table that was built for more than one person and eating alone at it. Your silence was not weakness. Your patience was not stupidity. Your love was real even if it was not returned in kind. But the door is open. Has always been open. And one suitcase is enough to start with. If this story reached you, please like, share, and leave a comment below. Tell us which moment stayed with you. And if you are navigating a marriage or relationship where you are being made invisible, please check the link below. It might be the most important thing you read this season. Take care of yourselves. We will see you in the next story.